The air was thick with anticipation as the alien arena roared with excitement. Captain Jason Holt stood at the center, his muscles tense, eyes scanning the crowd. He wasn't here for a fight. He was here for a test, but not the kind he had expected. The alien planet he had been sent to was known for its powerful and proud inhabitants, but today it wasn't their strength that was being tested. It was his. Jason was a human, a soldier sent to represent Earth on this alien world, but to the beings around him, his presence was nothing more than a joke. He had already felt their judgment the moment he stepped off his ship. The alien people regarded humans as weak and inferior, their minds too small, their bodies too fragile to compare with their own. The whispers had followed him through the crowded streets, mocking his every step. But it wasn't the crowds that bothered Jason. No, it was the Princess Aria, the royal heir of this alien world. Aria, with her striking features and glowing, metallic blue skin, stood on a raised platform, her piercing white eyes fixed on him with a mix of curiosity and disdain. She was beautiful, commanding, and powerful, yet the way she regarded Jason was one of pure superiority. "You think you can survive this?" she mocked, her voice carrying across the arena. "The very idea of a human challenging us is laughable." Jason clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to respond with a sharp retort. Aria's insults didn't faze him, but he knew that to gain any respect here, he had to endure. The challenge had been set, a test of strength and agility. And it was clear that this wasn't just about physical ability. It was about proving that a human could hold his ground against the might of an entire alien species. "Let's see how your weak human body holds up in a real challenge," Aria said, her voice dripping with contempt. With a flick of her hand, the challenge began. Aria leaped from the platform, her lithe body moving with an elegance that Jason couldn't help but admire, even if her arrogance disgusted him. The arena lights flared as they circled each other, the crowd buzzing in anticipation. Jason had been through countless battles, but this was unlike any fight he'd ever faced. He wasn't just fighting for his life, he was fighting for the dignity of humanity. The alien spectators howled with laughter as the fight began. Jason's movements were slower, his human strength nowhere near that of Aria, who seemed to glide effortlessly around him. Every blow he landed was easily dodged or blocked, and Aria's taunting words echoed in his ears. "You're so pathetic," she sneered, twisting his arm behind his back. "This is almost too easy." But Jason wasn't one to give up easily. Despite the pain, despite the humiliation, he fought back. Every step, every breath, was a battle to prove something that went beyond his pride. The crowd watched in silence now, sensing that the human wasn't going down without a fight. In that moment, Jason's focus sharpened. He knew he wasn't going to win this challenge on pure strength alone, but he could use his mind, his human ingenuity. As Aria moved in for another strike, Jason saw his opening. With a swift, calculated movement, he sidestepped her and used her own momentum against her, throwing her off balance. It wasn't much, but for a split second, it was enough. The crowd fell silent, shocked by his sudden move. Aria's confident smirk faltered. Jason wasn't just a brute force. He was intelligent, adaptable, and it unsettled her. But before he could take full advantage of the moment, the fight was interrupted. An alien creature suddenly broke through the arena's protective barriers, attacking without warning. The alien was massive, its claws sharp and glistening with venom, its eyes wild with rage. Aria, caught off guard, tried to defend herself, but the creature was too strong, and it knocked her back with one brutal swipe. Jason, instinctively, sprang into action. Despite his injuries, despite the humiliation of the earlier fight, he didn't hesitate. The creature charged again, its claws aimed straight for Aria, who was still trying to regain her footing. Without thinking, Jason launched himself at the creature, tackling it to the ground. He fought with everything he had, his arms bruised, his chest heaving for air, but his focus was on one thing: keeping Aria alive. The creature snarled, twisting and thrashing, but Jason held on. He managed to land a solid punch to its throat, stunning it long enough to deliver a final blow. The alien creature crumpled to the ground, motionless. Jason, bloodied and exhausted, stood over it, his breath ragged. He looked up, expecting Arya to be horrified by the violence, but instead he found her staring at him in stunned silence. There was no mockery in her eyes now, only something he couldn't quite place. For a long moment, they stood there, the dust of battle settling around them. The alien crowd, which had once laughed at Jason, was now eerily quiet. It was as if they were waiting for something, anything, that would break the tension. Arya, still dazed from the fight, finally spoke, her voice softer than it had been before. "You saved me." She didn't sound mocking. There was no pride in her words, just a quiet realization. Jason, his muscles aching and his pride bruised, simply nodded. "I did what I had to." But what Jason didn't realize was that this moment, this unexpected, raw display of humanity, had shaken something deep within Arya. It had been her pride, her belief that humans were nothing more than inferior creatures, that had kept her distant. But Jason had just proven that humans were capable of things her kind had never imagined. As the tension hung in the air, both Jason and Arya knew that this encounter, this unexpected bond, was only the beginning of something that neither of them could have anticipated. It was a turning point, and the future would be anything but predictable. The days that followed the battle in the arena were strange for both Jason and Arya. The tension between them, which had once been filled with mocking and disdain, began to shift in ways neither had expected. It wasn't just the fight that had changed things, it was what had happened afterward. Jason had saved her life, not once but twice, and in a way that action had made something inside of Arya crack. She no longer saw him as the weak, inferior human. Instead, she saw someone who had the courage to face the impossible, someone who was willing to put himself at risk for her, even when she had been cruel to him. Jason, for his part, had expected nothing from Arya. He hadn't fought to earn her respect. He had fought because it was what needed to be done. But now that the arena battle was behind them, he found himself struggling to understand the changes happening between them. The first time they spoke after the fight, it wasn't in front of the others. It was late at night, after the crowds had gone, and the two of them were sitting in the quiet of the royal palace's courtyard. Arya, usually so composed, sat with her shoulders hunched slightly, staring out at the distant horizon. Jason sat across from her, nursing a small wound on his arm. "I didn't expect that," Arya said quietly, breaking the silence. Jason glanced up at her, surprised. "You're not what I thought you were." She turned to him, her glowing white eyes now softer than before. There was no mocking in her voice, no superiority, just curiosity. Jason didn't respond right away. He had been through enough battles to know when words weren't needed, so instead, he simply nodded. But Arya seemed to want to continue, to explore the thoughts that had been forming in her mind since the fight. "You fought back. You didn't give up," she continued. "I thought humans were weak, but you proved me wrong." Jason felt a strange lump form in his throat. There was no hate in her voice now, just acknowledgement. He hadn't expected that kind of praise from someone like her. The princess had been so full of herself before, believing that her strength and her bloodline made her superior to everyone. Now, it seemed like something inside her was changing. "Humans don't give up easily," Jason said, the words coming out with more confidence than he felt. "We might not be as strong as your kind, but we have our own ways of surviving." Arya was quiet for a moment, and then she spoke again, her voice low. "I've never met anyone like you before. I don't understand you." Jason didn't know how to respond. He wasn't here to explain humanity to her, nor was he interested in trying to convince her that humans were superior. He simply did what was needed, because it was his job, his duty. Over the next few days, the dynamics between them continued to shift. Jason was assigned to protect Arya as she dealt with political matters and threats against her kingdom. They spent hours together, strategizing and planning. But what was odd was how easily they worked together. Arya was sharp, a natural leader, but she was also starting to understand that not everything could be solved with her strength alone. Jason brought a different kind of intelligence to the table, one that didn't rely on brute force. She watched him in awe as he mapped out their escape routes, devised clever tactics, and outsmarted their enemies without breaking a sweat. In turn, Jason began to see Arya in a new light. Gone was the arrogant princess who had mocked him in the arena. Instead, he saw a leader, burdened by the weight of her responsibilities, who struggled with the expectations of her royal bloodline. He saw the moments when she would close her eyes in frustration, as though the pressure of her position was suffocating her. He realized that for all her strength and beauty, Arya was just as trapped by her role as he was by his duty to Earth. One night, after they had barely escaped an ambush by an enemy faction, the two of them found themselves alone in a quiet room. The tension in the air was thick, but it was different now, not the tension of anger or pride, but something deeper, more uncertain. Jason was cleaning his weapons when Arya entered, her face weary but determined. "You saved me again," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I don't understand why you keep doing it. You don't owe me anything." Jason glanced up at her, wiping a smear of blood off his brow. "Maybe I don't owe you anything," he said slowly, "but I can't just let you die. I'm here to protect you, and I'm not going anywhere." Arya was silent for a moment, processing his words. When she spoke again, there was an unfamiliar softness in her tone. "You could have gone home, you know. You didn't have to stay. Earth probably wants you back. You've done your part." Jason set his weapon down and met her gaze. "Maybe. But I'm not going back. Not yet." That night, something shifted. They both realized that the connection between them was no longer just about their mission or their differences. It was something more, something neither of them had expected or understood. The next few days were filled with tension, but it was a different kind of tension now. It wasn't hostility. It was a mix of curiosity, attraction, and something else they weren't willing to admit yet. They continued to work together, their chemistry growing stronger as they faced each new challenge. They shared more moments, moments where Arya looked at Jason not with disdain, but with something else in her eyes. Jason, too, started to realize that he wasn't just fighting for Earth. He was fighting for something else now. By the end of the week, Arya had changed. She wasn't the cold, proud princess who had looked down on humans. She was starting to see them differently, and Jason differently. She had seen his strength, his heart, his loyalty, and it made her question everything she had believed about humans, about herself, and about what truly mattered. But even though their dynamic had changed, there was still the weight of their reality hanging over them. Arya was royalty. Jason was just a soldier. And their worlds, no matter how much they were drawn together, were still galaxies apart. Yet, despite the distance between them, one thing was certain. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And neither of them was sure what that would mean for their future. It had been weeks since the day they fought together in the arena, since the battle with the alien creature that had caused everything to shift. Jason and Arya had grown used to each other's presence. What had once been tension-filled meetings now became quieter, more comfortable moments. It was as if the walls that had separated them, the proud alien princess and the human soldier, had begun to crumble, piece by piece. Every day they spent together brought new understanding between them. Arya, who had once laughed at Jason for his humanity, now found herself watching him with a mixture of curiosity and something she couldn't name. She was still the princess, still the heir to her people, but she no longer saw herself as so far above Jason. She had come to admire him in ways she couldn't explain. Jason, on the other hand, had been surprised by his own feelings. He had never intended to develop any emotional attachment to Arya, but over time, he found himself drawn to her. Her strength, her vulnerability, the way she fought not just with her body, but with her mind. He admired all of it. The arrogance that had once made her seem distant now seemed like a mask she wore to protect herself, a mask he was slowly peeling away. One evening, after another long day of strategizing and avoiding enemy attacks, they found themselves alone in a quiet corner of the palace. The sun had just set, casting a warm golden light through the windows, and the atmosphere in the room was calm. Jason was sitting by a table, sorting through some maps, but his mind wasn't on the mission anymore. It was on the woman standing across from him. Arya had been unusually quiet lately. She wasn't as sharp as usual, her mind clearly preoccupied. Jason didn't ask, didn't push, he simply let her be. But tonight, she seemed different. The air between them was heavier, filled with something unspoken. Arya walked over to the table, her gaze meeting his. "Jason," she said softly, her voice. When they pulled away, neither of them spoke. There were no words that could capture what had just happened. But as Arya looked at Jason, her eyes searching his, he saw something in her gaze that he hadn't seen before, a sense of peace, of understanding. "I never thought I'd feel like this," she whispered. "Neither did I," Jason replied. But in that moment, they both knew that something had changed between them. The bond they shared wasn't just about survival or duty. It was about something much more complicated, something that neither of them fully understood, but both of them knew was real. And as the night grew darker around them, they knew that this unexpected romance, this strange, beautiful connection, was only just beginning. As the days passed, the weight of Jason and Arya's growing bond began to settle over them both like a heavy cloak. Their connection, once built on mutual respect and quiet understanding, had evolved into something deeper, something more dangerous. Neither of them had anticipated where this would lead, and neither of them was prepared for the consequences of what they had started. After their kiss, things had changed. It wasn't just about being together in a way they hadn't expected. It was about the truth of their feelings and the risks those feelings carried. Jason was a soldier, a human, and Arya was an alien princess, someone who had once thought of him as weak. Their relationship defied everything they had been taught, everything that their respective cultures had told them was possible. And that made it dangerous. It started with small things, Arya's glances lingering a little longer than before, the way she seemed to seek out Jason's company more often. At first, Jason didn't think much of it. After all, they had been working together for weeks, and their bond had only deepened. But the more they spent time together, the more Jason realized just how risky this was. He had heard the whispers. He had seen the stares. The palace wasn't a place where relationships like theirs were welcomed. Despite the distance between them, there were eyes everywhere. Arya's people were watching, waiting for any sign of weakness, any moment they could use against her. As the heir to the throne, Arya's every move was scrutinized. Jason's presence, especially now, had not gone unnoticed. The political landscape of the alien world was built on power, and Jason, a human, was the last person anyone would expect to be close to a royal like Arya. One day, as they were walking through the royal gardens, their hands brushing ever so slightly, the gravity of their situation hit Jason with full force. They were talking, laughing about a recent mission they had completed, when a sharp voice broke their moment. "You're going to ruin everything. You know that, right?" Jason turned to see it was General Call, one of Arya's most trusted commanders. The man's expression was hard, his eyes narrowing as he locked onto Jason. There was no mistaking the tone of warning in his voice. "What do you mean?" Jason asked, keeping his voice steady despite the sudden tension. He had always respected Call, but something in the man's gaze told him this was no casual conversation. "You think no one notices," Call continued, his voice low. "You think you can just waltz in here and take her from us, from her people?" Jason's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure how much Call knew, but the way he was speaking made it clear that the general wasn't ignorant of the growing closeness between him and Arya. And it seemed like the man was already making judgments. The risk of their relationship was becoming all too real. Before Jason could respond, Arya stepped between them, her expression calm but firm. "Enough, Call," she said, her voice unwavering. "Jason is my ally. If anyone is to be concerned about taking something, it is me, not you." Call's eyes flicked between the two of them, and for a moment, Jason saw a flash of something dark in his gaze. "You think you can protect him? You think your people will just accept this?" Call's tone was sharp, biting. "This could ruin everything. You cannot afford such a distraction." Arya stood her ground, her jaw clenched. "I make my own choices, General." The tension in the air was palpable. Jason could see that Arya's words, though defiant, were also a warning to Call. She was still the princess, and no one, not even the generals, could dictate her actions. But the anger in Call's eyes suggested that this wouldn't end here. He would find ways to undermine their relationship, to use their connection against them. Later that evening, as they gathered in the palace hall for a strategy meeting, Jason couldn't shake the unease that had settled over him. Arya seemed distracted, her usual sharp focus lost in thought. Her hand brushed his briefly under the table, but it was as if she was lost in her own world. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jason, we need to talk." He nodded, his heart racing. He had known this conversation was coming, but he hadn't expected it to be so soon. He followed her to a quiet corner of the palace, away from the prying eyes of the council and soldiers. "What's going on, Arya?" Jason asked, his voice low. "What's happening with Call? And why are you so tense?" She sighed deeply, running a hand through her hair. "I've been thinking about this. About us. I never thought it would get this far. And now, I don't know how to stop it from spiraling." Jason frowned. "What do you mean?" "I'm not just a woman, Jason. I'm the future of my people. I carry the weight of an entire world on my shoulders," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "And what we're doing, this connection between us, it can't be allowed. My people will never accept it. My generals will see it as a weakness, and if they do, we're both dead." Jason's stomach tightened. He had known the risks, but hearing her say it out loud made everything feel real. "So, what do we do? Pretend it never happened?" Arya shook her head. "No, we can't. But we have to be careful. The consequences are too high. If this gets out, it won't just ruin your life. It will ruin mine too. I'm not ready to lose everything for this." Jason was silent for a long time, his mind racing. He had never thought that the consequences of their relationship would be so far-reaching. But now, as Arya looked at him with that mixture of fear and determination, he knew she was right. The stakes had always been high. They were just too close to realize it. "I don't want to lose you, Arya," Jason said quietly. "But I don't want to lose myself either. I can't pretend like I don't feel for you." "I don't want to lose you either," Arya replied, her voice soft, filled with the weight of the unspoken words between them. "But we need to think carefully." Jason nodded, knowing that their path forward would be anything but easy. The consequences of their relationship had only just begun to take shape, and neither of them knew what the future held. All they knew was that they had to survive whatever came next, together, if they could. The days following their conversation were filled with tension. Arya and Jason knew their bond was dangerous, but neither of them was willing to let go. The rebellion against tradition had already begun, and there was no turning back now. Every glance they shared, every word exchanged felt like a risk, but it was a risk they both seemed willing to take. What was at stake, after all, was their future, their love, and everything they had built in the shadows. Despite the growing threat around them, there was a quiet resolve in Jason. He had always been a soldier, and soldiers were taught to face danger head-on. But this was different. This wasn't a battle between two warring factions or a fight for survival. This was about a rebellion against centuries of tradition. It was about defying everything that had been instilled in him and Arya, about questioning the very laws that governed their worlds. The palace itself felt like a pressure cooker. Whispers echoed through the halls as Arya's decision to be with Jason spread through the ranks. Her closest advisors were uneasy, and her generals seemed to be biding their time, waiting for the right moment to challenge her. They all knew that a human, one of the lowly inferior species from Earth, should never be allowed to stand by her side. The mere thought of it was a threat to their way of life. Jason, however, felt a deep sense of determination. He had come to this alien world with no expectation of finding love. His mission had been simple: survive, protect, and return home. But that had all changed the moment he met Arya. She had laughed at him for being human, for being weak, but now that same weakness had become their greatest strength. Their love was a quiet rebellion, a challenge to the status quo. They were breaking rules without even trying. One evening, after a long day of avoiding prying eyes, Jason and Arya met in a secluded courtyard within the palace grounds. It was dark, the stars barely visible behind the dense clouds that had rolled in from the desert. The atmosphere felt heavy with the weight of what they were about to discuss. The world outside seemed to hold its breath, and for a brief moment, it was as though nothing else existed. "I've been thinking," Arya said, her voice barely above a whisper, "about everything, about what we're doing." Jason turned to face her, his heart racing. "What are you thinking?" "I don't want to keep hiding, Jason. I don't want to keep pretending we're not who we are. This connection we have is real. It's not just some fleeting moment. And I don't want to lose you." Jason took her hand, feeling the weight of her words. "I don't want to lose you either. But you're right. Everything has been about hiding. It's like we're living in a world where we can't be free, where we're constantly watching our backs." Arya nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "I'm tired of living like this. The longer we stay in the shadows, the stronger the fear grows. We're making it worse by not taking action." Jason's brow furrowed. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we can't just keep running from the truth. We have to fight. We have to show everyone that we're not just some strange anomaly. We have to make them see that love doesn't have to follow their rules. It can be something more, something that changes everything." Jason paused, taking in her words. He could feel the strength in her voice, the fierce desire for change. She wasn't asking for a small victory. She wanted to break down the walls of tradition that had kept her people shackled for centuries. She wanted to lead her people into a new era, one where love, respect, and equality were not determined by the species or bloodline. But could they truly do this? Could they stand up to the ancient customs that had governed their world for so long? "You're talking about rebellion," Jason said, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "A rebellion that could get both of us killed." Arya smiled softly, her eyes filled with a quiet, almost serene confidence. "Yes, but a rebellion that could change everything. We've already defied tradition by being together. Now it's time to make it official. It's time to show the galaxy that nothing can keep us apart, not even centuries of history." Jason could feel the weight of her words, the magnitude of what she was suggesting. It wasn't just a rebellion against the palace, against her generals, or even her people. It was a rebellion against the very idea that one species was superior to another, that a person's worth could be determined by the blood running through their veins. They had already proven that love had no boundaries, but now they were ready to prove that no tradition could hold them back. "What do we do?" Jason asked, his voice barely a whisper. "We start small," Arya said, her voice steady and determined. "We make our stand known, quietly at first. We gather supporters, those who believe in us, in what we stand for, and when the time is right, we move. We make it impossible for anyone to ignore us." Jason felt a fire stir inside him. He had always been a fighter, but this was something entirely different. This was not just about survival. It was about a future where their love could thrive without fear. And that future was worth fighting for. As they stood together in the courtyard, their hands intertwined, they both knew that they had made a decision that would change the course of their lives forever. The rebellion against tradition had begun, and there was no turning back. They would stand side by side, not as enemies or strangers, but as equals, fighting for a future where love wasn't confined by the rules of a broken world. As the days turned into weeks, the reality of their rebellion began to settle in. Jason and Arya had no illusions about the path they had chosen. They were standing at the edge of a precipice, staring down a future filled with uncertainty. The weight of their actions pressed on them, but neither of them hesitated. They had already defied expectations, defied tradition, and now they were ready to face whatever came next. Arya's advisors were growing increasingly vocal. Whispers of rebellion spread through the palace like wildfire. Jason had become a symbol of defiance, a symbol of everything the elite feared. He was no longer just a human soldier. He was an agent of change, a reminder that even the most rigid structures could be broken. The more the palace tried to isolate him, the stronger his presence became. The people saw him as a hero, a man who had stood against the old ways and won. But that wasn't enough. Arya knew that their fight was only beginning. The palace couldn't be won with just whispers of rebellion. They needed something bigger, something that would shake the very foundation of the world they had built. It was time for action. One evening, after yet another round of secret meetings with her most trusted allies, Arya stood before Jason in their private quarters. She was tired, the weight of her decisions evident on her face. But there was also something else, something stronger. There was hope. "I've made my decision," she said, her voice firm. "Tomorrow, we begin. We make our stand known to the galaxy." Jason raised an eyebrow. "You mean, we announce our rebellion?" Arya nodded, her eyes determined. "Yes, we'll declare our intent to change the future. We'll show the galaxy that love and equality don't have to be dictated by centuries of tradition. We'll make our voices heard." Jason's heart raced. This was it, the moment they had been working toward. No more hiding, no more running. They were going to stand together and fight for the future they both believed in. "But how do we start?" Jason asked. "How do we show the galaxy we mean business?" Arya smiled, a spark of mischief lighting up her eyes. "We start with a message. We broadcast our love to the world. We send a signal to every corner of the galaxy, one that no one can ignore." Jason was taken aback for a moment. "You want to make a broadcast? You're going to reveal everything to the entire galaxy?" Arya's smile softened. "Yes, it's the only way. If we're going to change things, we need the people on our side. The galaxy needs to see us as we truly are, two people in love, fighting for a future where love is not restricted by tradition. If we want to challenge the system, we need to show them who we really are." The plan was bold, perhaps reckless, but it was the only way forward. They would send a message across the stars, a declaration of their love, a declaration that they would not be silenced, no matter the cost. The night before the broadcast, Jason couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. What if the rebellion failed? What if they lost everything? The odds were stacked against them. The palace had the resources, the power, and the army. Arya, despite her position, was still a single leader against an entire system. But then he thought about Arya, about the fire in her eyes, the way she had stood by him, even when the world was against them. He thought about the love they shared and the future they were fighting for. He knew in his heart that they had no other choice. This was their chance, their one opportunity to make the galaxy a better place. The next morning, they stood before the broadcast station in the heart of the palace, a place that had been used countless times to send messages of war, of dominance, and of control. Now, it would carry a message of hope, of love, and of rebellion. Arya stepped up to the control panel, her hand steady despite the gravity of the moment. Jason stood beside her, watching as she initiated the broadcast. He could feel the tension in the air, as though the entire galaxy was holding its breath, waiting for what they would say. When the signal was live, Arya spoke into the microphone, her voice strong and clear. To the people of this galaxy, we are here to tell you that love knows no boundaries. We are here to tell you that a future of equality, of freedom, is possible. It's time for a change. It's time for a new beginning. Jason stepped forward, his voice joining hers. We are not enemies. We are not threats. We are two people who refuse to let tradition and hatred dictate our lives. We are here to fight for a future where everyone, no matter their species, no matter their background, can stand together. We ask for your support, for your belief in a new world. The words echoed through the broadcast, reaching every corner of the galaxy. For the first time, the people of the galaxy saw something different. They saw a future where the old ways of thinking no longer had a hold on them. They saw a future where love, unity, and equality could overcome even the most rigid of traditions. As the broadcast ended, Jason and Arya stood in silence, the weight of what they had just done settling over them. There was no going back now. They had taken the first step toward a new world. But the journey was far from over. The reaction from the galaxy would be swift and unforgiving. Some would support them, others would oppose them. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but Jason and Arya were ready. They had each other, and together, they would face whatever came next. The beginning of their new future had arrived. It was just the first step in a long, uncertain journey, but it was a journey they would walk together, side by side. And no matter what happened, they would continue to fight for the love and equality they believed in.